From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Monday, July 7th, and here are today's headlines. Vermont Attorney General Charity Clark says her office is committed to fighting back against what she says are clear violations of the Constitution and rule of law by the Trump administration. Clark has joined lawsuits with at least 20 other states. Speaking on Vermont this week, she said she joined those cases because Vermonters are currently at risk over actions being taken at the federal level.
The most immediate impact that you can see, I think, is the withdrawal of federal funds. Now, that's our tax dollars, our federal tax dollars coming back to the state. Congress made that appropriation, and it is not constitutional to take it away. And it really is in a variety of areas.
Those areas include the Department of Education's threat to withhold funding over diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, the termination of federal electric vehicle infrastructure money used in Vermont to develop public charging stations, and the Office of Management and Budget's order freezing federal grants and loans. Vermont health officials say a change in federal flu vaccine policy will have little impact in Vermont. Recently, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. replaced all 17 members of the Advisory Immunization Committee. The new panel rejected flu vaccines that contain a mercury-based preservative because of alleged concerns that it might be linked to autism. Many studies have shown the substance to be harmless. State epidemiologist Meredith Plumpton says Vermonters will not be affected by this decision.
It's in less than 3% of the flu vaccines that were given in Vermont over the last couple of years, so it really shouldn't impact our supply at all.
Plumpton says the Vermont Health Department recommends that all Vermonters 6 months and older get an annual flu shot. Montreal's decision to reduce trash pickup to biweekly is causing some problems in some neighborhoods, that according to the CBC. It's part of a push to reduce waste and emphasize composting and recycling. Montreal is trying to become a so-called zero-waste city by the year 2030, and Mayor Valerie Plante has pledged to, quote, make Montreal the greenest city in North America. 3 Montreal boroughs have started implementing the plan, and they are fielding complaints about garbage piling up and rats, according again to the CBC. Toronto, Vancouver, and other Canadian cities implemented biweekly garbage pickup years ago. And a new study from the Appalachian Mountain Club shows that snowpack that lingers into summer could protect some plant communities on Mount Washington from some of the effects of climate change. But researchers say as the atmosphere gets warmer and snow starts to melt earlier, they may not be preserved forever. Jordan Torville is an ecologist with the Appalachian Mountain Club, and he says he's hoping the study can spur conversations with land managers about how to monitor and take care of those plant communities going forward.
The biggest thing that drives me in this work is protecting those very, very rare species, which probably have benefits also to a lot of pollinators that exist in the alpine zone.
Torville says strategies could include removing invasive species that are trying to compete with alpine plants, building fences to help pile up snow to create deeper snowpack, or preserving seeds for plants that are going locally extinct to grow them in a controlled environment. Coming up, Susan Ritz comes from a wealthy Minnesota family and now works as a writer and philanthropist in central Vermont. She speaks with Vermont Public's Erica Heilman about the pros and cons of having economic advantages others don't. That's after this.
Thanks for listening to The Frequency, where support comes from Alpine Telehealth, offering telepsychiatry solutions for Vermont hospital, community mental health, and primary care. Physician-owned and operated since 2018. Learn more at alpinetelehealth.com.
What Class Are You? Is a periodic series that explores everyday lives inside the American class system. Susan Ritz grew up in a wealthy family in Minnesota, and for the past 36 years, she's lived in central Vermont, where she writes books and is an active philanthropist. In this episode of What Class Are You?, reporter Erica Heilman speaks with Susan about the complexities of having more than most.
In the town where I grew up, I was not the richest person at all, but my grandparents, they had butlers and maids, and, you go to their house and you'd sit down and somebody would serve you dinner, and both of my grandfathers started from nothing and ended up running 2 of the biggest companies in North America.
Is this the first time that anyone has asked you this so directly?
Yes, and I'm recently been working on some writing about my life, and the person who's been mentoring me asked me to write about the absolutely hardest thing, the thing that I didn't ever want to reveal, and that was it.
Really?
Yeah.
What makes it so hard?
Judgment of other people. I think because I have the same judgments about rich people. They're arrogant. The arrogance of wealth, I'll just say that. And I grew up with that, thinking I came from a special family. I was special. And it took me a long, long time to get over that and realize I was not special in any way. The only difference between me and everybody else was that I had a lot of choices that other people don't have. And that's what I think the best thing about wealth is choice. But I think the thing that's surprising is how much shame goes with it, at least for me. The fact that I never had to suffer makes me feel invalid. But I've always held people who've had to struggle for their livelihoods or who have made something of themselves, like my grandfathers did, in high esteem. And I've never had to do anything. I never had to push myself or get ahead or finish a project or finish the book, or it didn't matter. Nothing ever really mattered. I wasn't going to be poor if it didn't matter. I wasn't going to not be able to support my family if I didn't do it. There was really no motivation for me to do what I think I could have done if I had actually gotten a job.
Does it feel as though even admitting to shame?
Yeah, I hate admitting to shame, because how do I get to be ashamed?
That's exactly what
Yeah, I should just be really happy with everything I got. And if I'm not happy, well, then there's something wrong with me, because I've got it all. I don't have it all. Nobody has it all. But I mean, I hid for years. I hid out and didn't. And I think a lot of people here do. But people would always ask, how do you get to stay home with your kids? And then I had to come up with an answer. Or what do you do? And I didn't ever have an answer because I didn't have a job. And then they go, well, how do you get to do that? And then
what were some of your answers? What are some of the things you said?
I made some good investments. Or, well, I was just born really lucky,
Do you find that people make assumptions about the happiness you get to have?
Oh, yes. And I learned very early on, money has nothing to do with happiness. I grew up in a really bad household, domestic violence, alcoholism, all the things that other people deal with. I dealt with all that, neglect, which I always felt like I couldn't talk about that because I was protected. But I wasn't protected as a kid. I was in the same situation as anybody is who has that happen in their home, and it happens everywhere. And that taught me really early on, money does not make you a happy person or a good person. It only protects you from what the consequences could be of your behavior.
You're protected from the law.
Exactly. I don't know. There's a song from Hall & Oates. You're a rich girl, you go too far, but it don't matter anyway. You can rely on your old man's money. But the last line is, it don't matter anyway. And I always heard it as, you don't matter anyway. If you grow up in the kind of family I grew up in, if you're a girl, you don't matter. Even though my grandparents tried to teach me a lot about money and what it meant to inherit money and how I should never, my one grandfather was like, this is a nest egg, never rely on this. And you remember every single mouth of you eat comes from the salt of another man's sweat. Be grateful for every single thing you have because somebody's working for it, even if it's not you.
But that sounds like it sounds like a very heavy gratitude.
Exactly. And so my life became about philanthropy. That's what I felt like where I could give back or where I could make a difference, that I could use my money to create things that were good for this community and good for my family, and also that I could enjoy. So that's what I started doing. And I'll tell you, the older I get, the more my shame turns to gratitude. And being so grateful I can give money, being so grateful I can travel, I can help my children, they don't have debt from college, being grateful that I live in a beautiful place, I get to live in Vermont.
Big money is not obvious in central Vermont. What do you know that I don't know or other people might not know about how it exists here?
There's a network. And some people are out in the network and some people are not out in the network.
You don't want to get too expensive a haircut.
Yeah. One of the of things in among a lot of people that I know that do have money and feel the same way I do. Like, I don't want people to think I'm a bad person. Is like, when you want a nice car, but you live somewhere where nobody has a nice car, you don't get it. But the philanthropy section, I think a lot of the stuff that gets done gets a lot of private funding. And I think that comes because I'm not the only one who loves being able to help the community. And coming here, I found other people who came here for the same reason. And so if the people that do have money here are all pretty much in the same boat of what can we do with this money to make our lives better and to make the towns better and to make kids' lives better or farmers' lives better, or what can we do to be helpful and useful in our community with what we were given just by being born.
This is Erica Heilman with Vermont Public.
And now it's time for our weekly check-in on news from the world of sports. A Monday edition this time, since the frequency was off for the 4th of July holiday. But to acknowledge Independence Day and my penchant for puns, the theme for today's sports report is stars and gripes. Let's start with the stars. First for Clayton Kershaw of the Los Angeles Dodgers, who last week became just the 4th left-handed pitcher in the history of Major League Baseball to record 3,000 career strikeouts, hitting the milestone in the Dodgers' 5-4 comeback win over the Chicago White Sox. Stars as well to the plucky Toronto Blue Jays and Tampa Bay Rays, who've refused to cede the AL East to the powerhouse New York Yankees. The Jays beat the Yankees in back-to-back games last week to tie them for the lead in the division. Their 11-9 victory Wednesday night came after blowing an early 8-0 lead. But remember, they don't ask how, they just ask how many. And Tampa Bay was just a half game behind New York and Toronto as the week wound down, so stars to the overachievers. Which brings us to the first of the gripes, the middling and maddening Boston Red Sox. And if that alliteration sounds familiar, it's because I used those words to describe last year's team, which flirted with sparks of life but never quite lit the flame and ended up missing the playoffs for a third year in a row. Well, 2025 is looking very much like a rinse and repeat. Just when you thought the team might be ready to turn the corner after taking 2 in a row from the Cincinnati Reds, beginning with a thrilling 13-6 win on Monday last week that featured an inside-the-park home run by Wilyer Abreu, who definitely deserves a star for following later in the game with a grand slam, they wasted a chance at a sweep by blowing a 3-0 lead in Game 3 with a bullpen implosion capped off by Greg Weissert yielding a grand slam to dash any hopes of starting a serious winning streak. Now, maybe the Sox got back to their winning ways over the weekend against the not very good last in the NL East Washington Nationals, but as of the 4th, the Red Sox were sputtering along with an under 500 record and looking like they'll be sellers rather than buyers come the trade deadline. That despite the $250 million they could be spending but probably won't after giving away star slugger Rafael Devers to the San Francisco Giants for very little in return. New York Mets fans may be griping a bit as their high-priced squad has lost its hold on first place in the NL East to the Philadelphia Phillies, but the Mets still have plenty of stars and lots of time to right their ship. They're still a safe bet to be a playoff-bound team, even if only as a wild card, so no gripes for Mets fans despite their recent slide. You know who can gripe, though? Fans of the Boston Bruins looking at the moves GM Don Sweeney has made since the start of the NHL free agent feeding frenzy. The Bruins finally had some cash to spend, a good $20 million or so under the salary cap. And for a team that was among the bottom feeders of the league in terms of goals scored in last season's playoff no-show, the biggest deal Sweeney has made so far is acquiring Edmonton Oilers winger Victor Arvidsson in exchange for a 2027 fifth-round draft pick. Nothing against Arvidsson, by the way, who's a decent player and has a few 20-goal seasons under his belt in the past with the LA Kings, but he only scored 15 goals last year for the Oilers, and while he gives the Bruins a little more punch on the right wing, it's not of the knockout level. What's really driving the griping here is how Sweeney scattered around other chunks of that pretty big pile of money, the most head-scratching example being a $3 million 5-year deal for Tanner Jeannot, whose name you probably don't know unless you exclusively follow players who excel at spending time in the penalty box. Jeannot hasn't totaled more than 20 points for a full season since 2021, but he fits the mold of the gritty, sandpaper kind of bruiser that Sweeney covets. He thinks Bruins fans will too, except they won't when they realize the team has committed 5 years to a fourth-line tough guy who won't do anything to put goals in the other team's net. Other so-called depth signings include the return of Sean Corrali, another at-best fourth liner with decent speed and some pluck to his game, but again, nothing of the needle-moving variety. And if he's that good, why did the Bruins let him go after his first foray in Boston anyway? Just asking. Those with more optimism will point to the signing of Matej Blumel, whose offensive numbers are actually quite impressive, at least in the minors. He was one of the rising stars for the Dallas Stars, but assuming he'll continue that success in the NHL is quite the leap of faith, and one I'm not willing to make when the needs of the team are so glaringly obvious and are simply not being addressed. Sweeney still has some cap money left, and maybe by the time you're hearing this, he's made a bigger splash in the free agent pool, but right now it's looking like the Bruins are going to be stuck in the deep end once again with no lifeguard on duty to keep them from drowning in mediocrity. But hey, if you're a fan of the Montreal Canadiens, the stars seem aligned for you. The Habs got themselves a bona fide star defenseman to pair with last year's rookie sensation Lane Houston when they acquired Noah Dobson from the New York Islanders for a pair of first-round draft picks. And finally, stars for Manchester, Vermont native Caden Harrington. The incoming freshman for the UVM Catamounts played high school hockey for Burr & Burton Academy and was selected by the LA Kings in the fourth round of this year's NHL draft. And that's our weekly look at news from the world of sports. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Mark Davis, Bob Kinzel, and the New England News Collaborative. Today's episode was edited by Liam Elder Connors, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you tomorrow.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.